to keep up with their Bible recap or whatever you're going to do and read through the Bible. And if you have any questions, be sure and bring them up. In fact, that's one of the first things I'm going to have you do is just if you have a question about what you've been reading in Genesis or in Job, we'll do our best to answer. But I'm going to start talking about, or tonight I'm going to look at the feasts that are in the Bible. And this is something I did right after I came here. I preached through all of this, and we actually celebrated Passover together, which was really a neat thing. And I plan on us trying to do that again. So I'll let you know when and all of that stuff is ready. But we're going to talk about those. And then on Sundays, I'm going to look at, I called it, What Do You Believe and Why? I think there's a lot of people that really don't understand what they believe or why they believe what they believe. And so I want to go through and using the Baptist Faith and Message as a guide, but I'm going to go through the basic tenets of our faith and what we believe and why we believe what we believe, and try to explain all of that. So that's going to be on Sundays, and then Wednesday nights we're going to look at the feast. But first of all, did you have any questions about the first few chapters of Genesis or the first, 12, 13 chapters of Job? I think we got through about there. Did you have a question about anything? I do have some discussion questions. If you want them, I can make copies and give them to you just for your own personal study. But I didn't really plan on us doing that. And had I felt like being here Sunday, I would have explained all this Sunday morning. Well, I want to look at the feasts. Yep, there we go. I didn't know whether you'd have it back here or not. What are the two most important Christian holidays for us today? Christmas and Easter, right? Are they mentioned in the Bible? Either one of them? No. Not as Christmas. The story, yes. And the resurrection, they're both there, but not as far as celebrating as a holiday. It's not mentioned in there. However, there are several things, several feasts or holidays that are mentioned in the Bible, and I want to spend some time talking about those. This is kind of an introductory thing, and I have several verses to read. So, and I did not print out anything for you to fill out. I guess I should have, but it was one of those things I just didn't get it done. All right, Luke 22:15. Jesus said to the disciples, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." So Jesus celebrated Passover. In Acts 20, Luke says that we sailed from Philippi after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and 5 days later joined the others at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. So that's another one of the feasts, Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then in verse 16 of chapter 20, it says, Paul decided to sail past Ephesus to avoid spending time in the province of Asia, for he was in a hurry to reach Jerusalem, if possible, by the day of Pentecost. There's actually 7 feasts, 8 holidays, I guess you could call it, because the Sabbath was one, and then 7 other feast days. And we're going to look at each of those over the next several weeks. The question is, should we be observing these? What do y'all think? Should we observe these feasts? Maybe not exactly the same way that they did, but in light of Jesus. Probably. Well, in Exodus 12:14, God said, "This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance." In the King James, it says, "In this day shall be unto you a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. Exodus 12, verse 17 says, celebrate the feast of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for generations to come. And then in King James, it basically says the same thing. I don't know why I put it on there, but forever. It says on there forever. So I think that it would be a good thing for us to be doing. Not necessarily, like I said, in the exact same way that the Jewish people do, because we know that all of these feasts, basically every one of them, points towards Jesus. And when we get into talking about Passover especially, there are a lot of things in the Passover celebration that Jewish people celebrate today. They do it today. They just don't see Jesus in it. So there are a couple of other holidays that are mentioned in the Bible, like Purim, and I just went blank. Anyway, those they were instituted by man, not instituted by God, but they are still celebrated, and I don't have a problem with those that are. But the ones that I want to focus on are the ones that were appointed by God. And they're called the appointed times, is another way to say it. So my first point is the appointed times of the Lord. In Leviticus 23, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Lord's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations, my appointed times are these. And then he goes on and he talks about each of those. So whose feasts are they? God's, yeah, they're the Lord's. They're God's feasts and God's appointed times, God's special days, not necessarily ours, okay, because He appointed. When did they become God's appointed time? It's a kind of a trick question. The Bible, he says that they are my appointed times, not they shall be. But in Genesis 1:14, it says, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. They will serve as signs for festivals and for days and years. And the word there translated as festivals could also be translated appointed times or holidays. And I think that they were appointed from the very beginning. I think that God has some very special places in the world. Jerusalem, Mount Moriah. Those are very special places, and I think He has special times too. He has a chosen people, and so a special people, special time, special places. In the Exodus, when Moses first went before Pharaoh and said, God said, let my people go, it wasn't to let them go completely. It wasn't to release them from their bondage. What he said in Exodus 5:1, it says, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and they said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert. And I think this was one of those appointed times. He said, let my people go so they can go hold a festival. Now, God knew that Pharaoh wasn't going to do that. And over time, all the different things that he did, he knew that Pharaoh would keep rejecting until the death of the firstborn. And I don't think that he was just trying to use that as a trick or anything that way. I think that he wanted them to go and do this festival and hold this appointed time. But that wasn't, he also knew that the Pharaoh wasn't going to let him, okay? Excuse me. It says that, Moses quoted God. He said, let my people go. And God doesn't lie, right? So when he is saying, let my people go so they can hold this festival, it's because he wanted them to go and hold the festival. And now this word that says feast, that is a word for feast. It is not the word for appointed time, but I think that they're very synonymous. I think they're basically talking about the same thing. And I really believe that God already had a festival at this time that Israel was supposed to observe, but it had a new significance with Passover. I think it was already probably a time that God set aside and said, you're going to hold a feast here, but it became more significant and took on a new meanings because of the Passover, what happened there. I think he's always had those special times, appointed times, and so forth. So Passover took on a new meaning as far as being delivered from Egyptian slavery. The Feast of Pentecost has to do with the giving of the law. And tabernacles represents the wilderness wanderings, and we'll get to all of those later. But all of those, I believe that God already had a time period set aside and said, this is going to be a special day. But it took on new significance because of the things that happened to the children of Israel during that time period. And then especially when you start looking at how Jesus is pointed to in all of these things. In 1 Corinthians 5, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you can read through it. Let me think, where am I going to start here? Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Is there more than one Passover?
No. I mean, one a year. Yeah. Now, there's other festivals. Passover, it begins with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And for 8 days, they are not to have any leaven. And then one of those days is the day of Passover. And at the very end of it, the Saturday night, as soon as darkness hits, as soon as the sun goes down, is the Feast of First Fruits. All three of those are together. And then 50 days later, you have the day of Pentecost. Those are all in the spring. And then in the fall, you have 4 others.
So as Jesus grew, he celebrated or observed all of them too?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Paul is talking to the Corinthians, right? Yep. And he says, I don't remember exactly what verse it is in here, but it says, get rid of the yeast that you are... get rid of the old yeast that you may be a new batch without yeast as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the festival not with old yeast, the yeast of malice and wickedness, but with bread without yeast, the bread of sincerity and truth. Now, this is a Gentile church that he's talking to. Very troubled Gentile church. But he's telling them that they ought to keep the Passover. And again, that's another reason why I think we ought to at least be, understand what's going on in each of these.
Now, is there something to remember when Jesus had given them the manna?
You mean just when in the wilderness wanderings, when they had the manna, that would just be part of the Feast of Booths. Yeah. Or tabernacles, yes. Had stopped to think, what was the other word? So he says he's telling them that they should keep the Passover. Now, let me... I skipped around a lot of that stuff I've already kind of mentioned. So there are 7 feasts mentioned in the Bible, and I'm getting where this is probably going to be it when I just talk about these things. They are called holy convocations. They're called special times, anointed times, feasts, solemn assemblies, a lot of different words that are used for that. But I think the important things are, number one, it was given to the people of the church, to the people of Israel, and then by extension to us as a church, to teach us, to show us, to help us to remember what's been going on. I mean, one of the things we do is we do the Lord's Supper. And we used to have a table up here, but it says, "This do in remembrance of me." It's to help us to remember what Jesus did for us. And that's what these feasts are designed to, is to help people or help us to remember what God did for the children of Israel, and by extension, what he does for us. Israel is it's a very agricultural society, and so a lot of it had to do with that. And it's also a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. Yes, sir.
So when Jesus gave the Lord's Supper that day, was that the first time it ever been done?
Well, it was part of Passover. It was part of the Passover celebration. There's several, like I said, there's a lot of things go on in Passover that point to Jesus, but Jesus gave it new significance. So Easter, the reason Easter changes from late March or middle of March to middle of April, late April, is because it has to do with the lunar calendar, and it has to do with the Passover. It would be right at the beginning of Passover. You know, I told you had the Feast of Unleavened Bread and then Passover. That would be the night that Jesus did the Lord's Supper with the disciples. And it all points to that. The Jewish calendar only had 354 days per year. So 7 times, this is kind of confusing, but 7 times every 19 years they added a 13th month. And that was to get it back in line with everything. Our calendar, by the way, it's not exactly 365 days a year, right? Because every 4 years we have leap year. But it's not exactly 365 and 1/4, because it's actually 365.24 days per year. So every 100 years, you don't have a leap year to get it all back to normal. Otherwise, over centuries and centuries, we would soon be freezing cold in the summer and burning hot in the winter. Yes, sir.
Somebody argued to me about at one time there was 13 months, not 12.
Well, it's probably whatever calendar. We use the Gregorian calendar, if I remember right. Is that the right name? I know there's other calendars, and it just depends on which calendar people used. Like I said, with the Jewish people, they had 12 months, but then 7 times every 19 years they added a 13th month to try to get everything straight, get it back to where it was. All of the feasts point toward spiritual realities that were fulfilled in Jesus. And they all basically are kind of in fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, promises to Noah, and then Abraham, and then David, and so forth, to the children of Israel. 7 is a very important number in the Bible. There are 7 days in the week. The 7th day is the Sabbath, the day of rest, which would be Saturday for us. Now, the early church, I say early, excuse me. I think it was about 300 or 400 A.D., may have been a little earlier than that, but that's when the Christians started worshiping on Sunday instead of Saturday. And it was basically a lot to do with separating themselves from the Jewish people, because they were not, they didn't want to be just called a Jewish religion. And I think that there's two reasons that I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a good thing. Number one is we're supposed to give the very first of everything we have, and that would be the first day of the week, which would be Sunday. And Sunday is also the day that Jesus rose from the dead, and so that's when they started celebrating on Sunday, was because of that. But it's going to be a little confusing when we get into this, because the Jewish day started at sunset and then went through the next sunset. So right now, if the sun's down, this would be Thursday, right now. And Thursday would go until the next sunset, what we would call tomorrow, and then it would be Friday. And it goes back to Genesis, where in Genesis 1, during the creation, it says there was the evening and the morning the first day, or evening and morning the second day. So it gets a little confusing when you try to figure out exactly when all of these things happen, and hopefully I can explain that to you well enough that we can keep track of all that and keep it straight. Every 7 years was a year of Jubilee, and 77s was found in Daniel, and uses in the book of Revelation. The number 7 is used more than 50 times. A whole bunch of different things. So 7 was an important number. So 4 of the feasts happen in the spring. I told you about this. There's the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover and First Fruits. Those all happen within an 8-day period, all 3 of those. And then 50 days later is Pentecost, and the word Penta means 50. So it's 50 days after that. Passover, which, we kind of took on the celebration of Easter, because that's when Jesus rose from the dead. So the Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, all of those became more significant to us because that's when Jesus rose from the dead. Pentecost is when the Spirit came and fulfilled the people, and the church basically began on Pentecost. Then in the fall, you have the Feast of Trumpets, which we've talked about, Gene and I have talked about before. This is just my thoughts, okay, and I could be wrong, but I really think that during the Feast of Trumpets is when the trumpet's going to sound and Jesus is going to come back and we're going to be raptured. It's during the fall time, okay? You have the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and that was the one day a year that the high priest could go in to the Holy of Holies and sprinkle the blood on the altar, on the mercy seat. And then the booths or tabernacles is it's reminding the people of the wilderness wanderings. And the whole point of that is, one, that they build booths out of sticks, brush, whatever they have, and they live in them. And it's open at the top. Now, they may have some boards there, but a lot of it has cracks and stuff so they can see the sky. That's to remind them of the wilderness wanderings, because during the wilderness wanderings, they didn't have houses to stay in. And the whole point of that is the study of Scripture, reading and spending time in the Word. And they will stay up, sometimes all night long, reading and studying the Scripture. But it has to do with the wilderness wanderings, kind of a celebration of that. And I heard one of the things I read years ago said that if it rained, that was even better, because then you got to understand how the children of Israel felt when it rained, when they were, of course, they were in a desert. But if it rained on them, you get that experience. So those are the 7 feasts. We will start with Passover next week and talk about it. It'll take us probably several weeks to get through it, because there's a lot to it. And it's very, very significant. Yeah, Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. Rosh Hashanah is a new year, and I don't remember exactly when that is. I'd have to go look it up. But that's the Jewish New Year. And they have a religious New Year and a civil New Year, and I don't remember which is which.
I don't remember either.
Yeah.
It's around September.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Hanukkah is the Feast of Lights. It's a celebration of, yes, Esther, right? Or is that Purim? That's Purim. Yeah, what is Hanukkah? It's the Feast of Lights. It's just basically it's kind of like our Christmas, only they have 8 days of it. They'll have a menorah. There are 2 types of menorahs, the candelabras, and I've got one I will bring up here. There's the one they use at Passover, which has 7 candles, 3 on each side and 1 in the middle. Then there's the one for Hanukkah, and it has 9. There's 4 on each side and 1 in the middle because they have 8 days. Of course, the one in the middle think stays lit, but they light one each day for the 8 days of Hanukkah. And when I started looking years ago, trying to find one, every one I found was the 8. And I didn't want the 8. I wanted the 6. So anyway. Anything else? Anything y'all want to add?
Matthew 24:31 says, "And he will send his angels with a great sound of the trumpet,
Right.
and they will gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other." And this is out right after the tribulation.
Yep. And I think that, like I said, I believe that's going to happen during the Feast of Trumpets.
What I think.
I think all of these things, and we'll, like I said, we'll delve into them more, but I think they all have a lot of significance with both what's happened in the past as well as what's going to happen in the future. So, and I really enjoyed, studying all of this. I had 2 different times our churches in the past, they've had the Christian Jews. I forgot what they're called. Anyway, they came in. One time we did a Feast of Passover, and he explained everything in about 30 minutes, which, there's no way I could do it in 30 minutes. And then the other time it was, I think it was the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. And tabernacle just means living or, living within. So.
Sort of temporary.
Yes, temporary housing. I mean.
It was temporary housing and booths. It's just like all this relates to a Christian. They had their booths and was dwelling in the wilderness.
Right.
As a Christian, this body is just temporary until we get to heaven and get our permanent body.
That's right.
That's sort of our counterpart on the Christian side.
Yep. Okay. That's all right. I'll forget it before you get there. It takes me a while to get through things.
It gets me when you look at certain things and they have a picture of God and he's gray-haired, he's old.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think it would be like that.
Yeah. The Renaissance painters, they did a lot of things. I mean, almost every one of them is a Anglo-Saxon, too, picture of Jesus. They're all Anglo-Saxon. They're not Jews. Well, Jesus was a Jew. He's going to look like a Jew. He's not going to look like an Englishman. But the Renaissance painter, they all painted him as a white skin. Yeah. Yeah. That I don't know. Yeah, this is true. Just remember, one angel killed 185,000 Assyrians, so I'm sure they're very strong too, powerful. All right. Well, Bob, you got a song we can sing? All right.